Welcome to the Data Science Speaker Series at the University of San Francisco. These events are sponsored by the Data Institute, which is the umbrella organization for all data science and data engineering programming here at the university. Students and guests, just a quick housekeeping item. As you know, we've been having some issues with the technology, so for today, during the Q&A, what we will ask you to do is stand up at your seat. So obviously raise your hand if you're called upon. Please stand up at your seat, and then Mike will repeat the question so that everyone in the room can hear it, okay? So we will not be having a standing mic over here today. All right? Thank you. Okay, but today we are excited to hear from Mike Terry, a seasoned software entrepreneur and technical leader with over a decade of experience. Mike has built and scaled engineering and data cultures at companies like LAWFTY, SubWire.io, Airbnb, and 30 Madison. Today, he'll share key lessons on discovering product market fit, establishing customer loyalty, and the early stage decisions that shape these organizations. Please join me in giving a warm welcome.
Thanks for having me. So as she mentioned, I'm Mike Terry. I have been a technical co-founder in early stage startups for the better part of a decade. I'm thrilled and honored to be back here, back in my old stomping ground. I used to live here in San Francisco. I'm now coming in from Brooklyn for all of 36 hours to speak with you guys today. And so I'm here to share some real world case studies, building culture, data culture specifically inside these organizations I've been working in. And I hope that you can take away some practical skills as you're going to your practicum and beyond to evaluate companies and the cultures that you're creating, growing, and joining. So I also heard that I might be getting comped a burrito by the university mission, so I definitely had to book the gig. That was a must. So yeah, a little bit about me. So before I even get into, in fact, some of those meaningful definitions about data culture and why establishing and growing data culture is so challenging, I'd like to share really more why I'm coming to the table and what these experiences have meant for me. So first off, I've mentored at this point probably nearly a dozen USF practicum students. I'm happy to boast that 100% of my students have gotten hired. That's a good number for you all, either by my companies or by other great companies. But let's sort of take that as a little bit of a bragging point. But before leaping into startups, I actually earned my Bachelor of Science and Master of Engineering from MIT. There I completed my thesis in invaluable hardware in the computer science and AI lab. Learned from some of the true founding fathers and mothers of artificial intelligence, some true OGs, Marvin Minsky, Patrick Winston, Noam Chomsky, to name a few. And back then, it was a different era in AI. I was obsessed with robotics and evolutionary algorithms. I'm not sure how much evolutionary algorithms you guys are covering in the curriculum this year, but that was what I spent my thesis developing. Really, and my dream job was actually to go work with DARPA and their driverless car system at the Grand Challenge that they had in the Mojave Desert. So about 20 years ago-ish, they had the first autonomous vehicle test out there. It was a pretty incredible experience, but there were really only probably a dozen teams working on it back then, and were really poorly funded. It's not the driverless car setup that we have here today. I actually managed to take my first Waymo ride yesterday. It was really nice. Quick show of hands. Have you all ridden Waymos yet? Pretty spectacular. Oh, my life insurance company that find out about it. So back then I didn't get the dream job with the autonomous cars, but I did get a start in big company engineering. I went to work for Raytheon developing radar algorithms for space and airborne systems. But I knew that my path would take me to building and creating startups. So in 2012, actually started the company LAWFTY. And one of the first things we did pretty early on was come here. So we partnered with the University of San Francisco, and we actually started on the journey of creating data culture from scratch. We had a really small team, we had a small office here in the Mission, over Mission 9th Street, and we started really hosting some pretty incredible students. And our big charter at the time was, could we compete in a very competitive AdWord landscape for Google? So we were creating a digital ad network for the legal industry, knowing full well that these prices are 2024 prices, but back then, competing for advertisements on Google, legal keywords were still the most expensive keyword. There's the most competitive space to get into. Perfect for data science, perfect for machine learning. So the question was, could we, so my business partner and I, he was coming from a legal background, me coming from engineering, could we compete in a space and develop a culture and a team around bidding very competitively? Could we compete in the space? It turns out we actually did, and so we were so successful that Airbnb took notice back in 2018. So thanks to some of the alums here who helped us build up that team and that culture. It was a really important time for us. Brendan, Kate, Jake, Phil, I don't know if you know some of those alums, but they really helped us form what was a really incredible culture that got on the radar of Airbnb. So this was actually, I think, my first week after we got acquired by Airbnb with LAWFTY. We've actually since continued to grow that business. So we survived post Airbnb. We were able to shift our workforce completely remote. During the pandemic, there was a bit of a finance crunch and a shift in our culture to remote work and increasing pressure on those bids that we were seeing from Google to actually bid competitively. And an additional pressure to turn over our bread and butter, which was the machine learning algorithms to buy those ads, over to Google to actually control the market. You might be familiar with some of the recent, sort of controversy around how Google both manages the market and runs the market. Sort of a little bit of a specific challenge that we ran into at LAWFTY. And over the last 10 years, as we've grown the business, we are now starting to see this additional sort of new chapter in data culture that we need to create. So the new tools that we're using, the new teams that we're forming, partially why I think we're really excited to come back here. So that first 10 years, though, really was about scaling up operations. Bids sort of made our early cultural decisions to bring the teams together. And I think efficiency was really the key there. Building the right models, refining our processes, and getting everything to run like a well-oiled machine efficient. And we did that, we built a solid foundation, we made the most of the data culture that we created there, ensuring that every decision was backed by data, every system optimized. So it didn't matter what meeting you were in over at LAWFTY, data visualizations were typically a part of it, and optimization was key. But as we look forward to the next 10 years and the culture that we need to build in that organization, we can leverage a lot of those experiences. As you know, the landscape is changing quickly, though. So we're now stepping into a world where AI-powered apps, like cars, conversations are becoming the norm about using these tools. Not just confined to data science and engineering, but really every piece of the organization. So the question we have to ask ourselves is how are we building that data culture now, this chapter, and how do we meet the requirements for what's coming next for our organizations? And so how do we not rest on our laurels of the success that we've had so that we can maximize the success moving forward? So the short answer there is we've gotten a great start. We continue to evolve and grow. We're looking for an infusion of talent, new ideas, new tools from folks in this room and other recruiting efforts that we have going on. And certainly the models that we have are holding true, with the new data that's being presented, but those models need to evolve, new techniques, so on and so forth. So in addition, the requirements on data governance, privacy, and security are also getting more complex as we train models where we may or may not know the origin or the creator of owner of some of the data that these models are trained on. So I wanted to take a quick poll, take a second, and make this a little bit interactive. I know that we're all looking at picking practicum, looking at what the next step in your career is going to be. So I wanted to do just a quick poll and understand how you all are assessing the data culture. And I chose the large FANG companies because they've got so much written about them and a long history of data culture that's public. But I'm using that, I'll sort of collect the results and share it with you all, but using that as an example to sort of set the stage for how we can think about data culture, not only joining the large tech organizations, but some of you might be looking at evaluating nonprofits, some of you might be looking at going to government, other types of organizations, not just big tech companies, and certainly some of you might even be, I would imagine, looking at starting your own.
Would one be the best culture?
One would be the best. Good question. I've actually got a couple of things to make this a little more interactive. So my other company, SubWire, we're actually doing live interactive video sharing. So if there's time, we'll actually do a quick video share at the very end, and then discuss what that means, how to create a data culture around having multiple parties all come together at the same time, may or may not know one another, to be able to be compensated and appropriately attributed to that content. So I think you guys probably better than, okay. So let's dive into it a little bit more. Now that I've given a little bit of the background as to why I'm here today to speak with you all and what I hope to impart, let's define data culture, starting with sort of a textbook definition. So what is data culture? Does someone want to offer up a quick shot at defining data culture? I'll give it. So let's go with the textbook. Collective behaviors, beliefs, and practices within an organization that define how data is used, managed, and integrated into decision-making processes. Seems pretty straightforward from my standpoint. But the way I think about it is, well, how do we observe it? You go into those interviews, you go into the tours of the companies, and you exchange emails and call people. You know, what are we actually looking for? Well, it kind of breaks down to what tools and models are being used in everyday workflows, the communication and workflows themselves within the organization. You can spot it typically right away if data is being used to reinforce points or to prove certain things. And then also, if you look at the environment in which a company is built. Earlier I was talking about how we had the LAWFTY office here and the partnership with the University of San Francisco. I think that was critical to the environment to cultivate the kind of culture we created. So, jumping ahead a little bit. I think about building great data culture. It's a lot like an exercise routine in an organization. See, not everyone is a fitness junkie like my brother-in-law, Elliot, who wakes up at 4 a.m. on a rainy day, laces shoes, and bikes 20 miles. Not everybody in an organization has that tenacity for the discipline that it takes to create data culture. So in the face of a lot of pressure in your organizations to take shortcuts, rely on gut feel instead of data, it does take a lot of discipline. It does take a lot of consistency. So really there are certain people who just naturally thrive with data, are setting a great example for others, making decisions, every decision is an informed one, rain or shine. But the rest of us, it is a team effort, and it takes practice, just like exercise. It's about showing up every day, whether the data is messy or pristine, or whether the project is exciting or mundane. But here's the thing, great data culture, it doesn't just live in the individuals in that organization, it spans the entire organization. So it's not just the analysts or the data engineers or data scientists, it's every department, from marketing to product, recruiting, all rowing in the same direction. And imagine a team where data doesn't just sit in the hands of a few, but flows freely And that comes down to the tools and it comes down to the practices, but that is what you need to empower everyone to make decisions. And that's where the magic happens, when the data becomes the language of the company. So when interviewing with these organizations, when we keep coming back to that, don't skip the small talk with product leads, recruiters, and really anyone in the organization, because you're going to be seeing a lot of clues about how they make decisions, and whether or not their data hygiene, data culture is one of active excellence or maybe one of a little bit of atrophy. So I'll share a quick example again from LAWFTY. One of my proudest data culture moments several years ago, we ended up moving that office that I talked about from here to Long Island, and we opened up a new office that had actually several TVs that we just sort of inherited in the office. And at the time we were battling a new bidding algorithm that needed some performance improvements. And so I suggested, well, why don't we just use these TVs and create a scoreboard for how well the business is doing up to the minute. So the idea was met with a little bit of concern because really we hadn't done that before. We hadn't infused up to the minute data into everything that we're doing and putting it on a big broad display. But it turned out it was actually a success. So at the time the company was buying keywords, it was fielding probably thousands of phone calls a day. And we needed to understand where our efficiencies were. What better way to put it? What better way to see it than actually put it on a data visualization in the office where everybody can see? So that was something that I sort of took the lead on and made sure that we were able to do that. We might bring that back. Well, we actually ran it for a little while and it was very successful. We were able to shore up some of the inefficiencies that we were seeing at the time. And that's just kind of an example. And so that's what it feels like. Data culture is proud. It's visible and it reminds people to feel connected to the mission of the organization. So then things can get a little bit uncomfortable though if you start to really open up and use data more than people are expecting to show and share decision making. But here's what things get a little bit uncomfortable because great data culture, it acknowledges and surfaces threats to the organization. And these can come in very many forms, whether it's resistance for people who aren't comfortable with the data in their face, basically, the temptation to bypass proper data validation to move faster, or the bias that sneaks into even the best data sets. People naturally avoid these uncomfortable truths, and it can come up in teams quite a lot. I've seen it. So it's kind of like looking in the mirror after skipping a week of those important workouts. It's hard to face. So don't be like the family in Encanto, where they're sort of said, we don't talk about Bruno. There's this idea, this elephant in the room that can come up when you start to use data to surface the big problems in business and cross boundaries from engineering to data to product and so on and so forth. But hopefully the data and the tools and the organization culture that you're creating are all reinforcing the same mission of tackling those problems head on. I've got a couple more examples to share here, and then I think we'll have a little bit of time for a demo and some questions. So I'll share another example when I was an engineering manager at Airbnb right before the company went public. So at that time, we were racing around the clock, working on a newly formed data engineering task force. And what the charter was to prepare the airflow pipelines that had been used to report to the CEO. There was a CEO dashboard. There were a lot of financial reporting things. And there's just a whole history of probably, I think at that point, 8 years of data pipelines and different pieces of, different visualizations to maintain in preparation for the company going public. So with this mad dash from a private company to try to prepare to become a public company, well, the rules change. So honest mistakes during your quarterly earnings reports, some things like that, when you're private, it's manageable. But once you go public, this reporting to the SEC, well, that's a whole new beast. And so the consequences are enormous and the pressure even bigger. So during the time, I saw firsthand a really amazing team come together. There were a lot of debates about tooling, so using Spark and sort of maybe ditching Airflow. You guys are using Airflow right now. But, it was a task force that really stepped up to create the right culture as the company was shifting from private to public. And probably the biggest change, if you think about it, is transparency. Everyone loves to talk about transparency, but sometimes if the culture is shifting, transparency can take a hit. So in a private company, people are more willing to share that data freely, or it's really not as much scrutiny. But in a public company, there's definitely stricter controls, stuff happening behind the scenes. And why? Because the risk of leaks skyrockets. There's more people, more scrutiny on the data sets. So I thought that was a really important step to see how people reacted to those changes in the culture that were happening. So at the time, as we were preparing the pipelines, it wasn't just about ensuring accuracy now. We had this whole new layer. It was about creating safeguards and preventing leaks, limiting access, and locking down certain systems. And that previously wasn't really part of that data culture. It was much more open, much more free, and I started to see things change. But it felt like a necessity. It didn't feel like it was being imposed for the wrong reasons. So reinforce a critical point that great data culture doesn't shy away from sensitivity, especially when the stakes are high. So, in the earliest stage of most companies, though, when I think back to both SubWire and LAWFTY, those areas of security can easily reach some level of neglect. Short-handed teams, short staff being underfunded, tech debt really goes up if you're not focusing on some of those security measures and access controls from an early stage. So you either pay it at the beginning or pay it later, but great data culture will ensure that those things are being addressed. And so, yeah, it's not just about empowering people with data. It's also about some of those less enjoyable parts of managing. Last example I'll share here is something that happened earlier this year with SubWire. So this is what happens when data culture meets an existing data culture coming from the customer side. So prior to this baseball season, I actually had an opportunity to meet the owner of the Milwaukee Brewers. He was incredible. We started to talk about some of the challenges they were seeing in the off-season, and we were talking about a potential partnership. And one thing that was apparent from day one was that he was really data focused. And that's incredible. You know, it's kind of, we think it's obvious a little bit with Major League Baseball and baseball in general being such a quantitative sport. But it was really nice to see a potential customer at a level of data culture, bringing that data culture to our team, teaching us things. So we weren't as well versed in some of the advanced metrics of the baseball specifically, but we learned very quickly. It's kind of like the merging of two data cultures coming together. It's a really great experience. So hats off to the Brewers. They signed Reese Hoskins. That was one of the things that we was talking about, the quantitative metrics. He's done extremely well this season, and they were actually one of the first teams to lock up the playoffs this year. So actually, I think it's the first. So congrats to them, good for them, and we did some engagements with them at SubWire, and we're going to continue to learn from their data culture and cross-pollinate. All right, so I think we have a little bit of time to run a quick experiment and take some questions. But why don't we start with questions? A little data acquisition experiment.
Thank you for your speech. I was just wondering how you approach questions that data can't necessarily answer, particularly as part of like a data function. So, for example, like Costco offering dollar per
So the question is, how do you address questions that data cannot answer? I'd actually say that data can't answer probably most questions. So you can bring as much data to the table, but there are certain things in the data set will not cover. So first, the starting point is to make sure that if data can answer it unambiguously, and that's the easy answer, but assuming that that's not the case, it's like any other organization, you've got healthy debate, and really the other pressure that you have is to make decisions quickly and to be decisive. So I think what data culture when fostered and done right, it actually encourages people to be decisive even in the absence of data. It's a bias towards action, it's a bias towards decision, and not necessarily focusing so much on senses. other ways to
How did you build data literacy in your organization? Because not everyone necessarily looks at data saying we are used to operating data. So how do you bring that into a team where people have different backgrounds?
So the question is, how do we build data literacy within our organization? I think it's a great question. I'll tell you one way that it didn't work. So one of the technologies that has been pervasive through my entire career practically at this point, PostgreSQL has really stood the test of time. It's like the Red Hot Chili Peppers of data. Like, new things come and go, but it's just consistent and you can still perform. So I actually held sessions on Postgres. So I actually brought in our lawyers, I brought in our business development folks, and probably about half of the team took to my lessons on some basic SQL queries. And then I knew which half didn't know how to use SQL, and what we did was we communicated about that accordingly. So I knew people that picked it up, and I knew people that didn't. So the one answer would be to continuously teach and learn within the organization. Another ritual that we instituted was called it pie in the sky. And so sort of, it was like our version of speaker series. We basically had once a week someone giving a pitch or a talk that wasn't really relevant to the business, but was instilling some of these data concepts and teaching. The other thing is you can't expect everybody to have the proficiency of a data scientist or data engineer, but it's about knowing what the limits of capabilities are and sometimes using different tools. So we've actually leaned pretty heavily into Looker for some of the non-technical folks, and it's been a game changer for them.
Thank you for the presentation, Mike. My name is Ellen. I have a question regarding your experience. I see that you're a serious technical founder. You have built successful company, agency, like in various niches. I saw your LinkedIn and it was like marketing, law, data, even like entertainment. I wonder, given your tech-focused educational background, first question, do you have any advice how you can identify like a business idea that can scale, or knowing like co-founder that you can work with, especially like, you know, you work in various niche. And then next questions is, my questions come from myself as someone who failed to build, I tried to do startups, try to build something, but instead of exit as a company, just you did with Airbnb, I end up exit from the company because I wasn't good at that. How many startup or ideas that you work on aside the successful company that actually make it happen and become successful? Yeah.
Here are 3 questions here. How do you take an idea and bring it into a business? How do you find a co-founder?
Yeah.
And what was some of the businesses that you make the list
Yeah,
here?
yeah.
Okay, so how to take an idea and bring it to life as a business. I lean very heavily into lean startup methodology and building prototypes. As a technical co-founder or as a technical founder, I kind of have that superpower. You know, I don't need to go hire a dev agency to get the ideas off my own. So that I think that's pretty unique. But really, being if you're coming, you all coming from technical backgrounds, you kind of fill in that role of the builder and ideator. So I think that's something that we should all be able to take advantage of. But doing it on a small team at the very least, so you're not just validating ideas yourself. And that's why we're going to do this experiment here, because this is a new concept that we have. We want to test it out, building it in public. So it's really important to not shy away from getting more groups involved. So find a co-founder. I don't know what the secret is. I don't know. There's Todd and I found each other, you know, in a share house in the Hamptons, and 14 years later, we're still good friends. I think there's a lot of luck involved, and like anything with luck is most at bats that you get and try to get out there and never. So to that point, as you guys are looking at data culture and evaluating working at these businesses, think about how much the balance of working from home and what the trade-offs are of working from home versus getting a lot of time with your colleagues to ideate on things that it'd be really hard to do on a scheduled Zoom call. Okay, so the third question about the failures. So my first entrepreneurial venture predates college. I actually helped open up a punk rock club in South LA. And we didn't make any money, but we poured a lot of spirit and heart and everything into it. And then I went off to college, and then I wasn't able to sort of like benefit from some of that work. So it wasn't a failure per se, but it was a learning that probably doesn't make it to the. These are all these different learnings, big and small, that I've used to now channel to what I speak of. There was another one here, which was before LAWFTY. We started a company called See the Scene. This was in between my Raytheon days and LAWFTY days. See the Scene was the early days of mobile apps. It was a way to see bars and restaurants on your phone before you go out. So know before you go to see live video, check out. So we were able to get into like 15 different bars and restaurants. Didn't make a single dollar. So that. So there's been a lot. I've got a few others. I've also helped a lot of my friends and colleagues get their ideas off the ground over the years. Also coded for some of them, kind of built little prototypes. Just staying very active, I think, is. All right, should we jump into the experiment, or do you have any other questions? So I'm calling this an experiment, but it's really just an A/B test. I'd like you to scan one of these two. So, all we're doing here is we're actually just, we're going to create a photo collage. So you're going to be asked to share an email and camera permissions, and then you can snap photos with, there's going to be a little camera button in the middle. You can take a selfie, or you can take a photo. And so hopefully our servers don't break here, but this. And the reason why I'm bringing this up now is because we have some very pressing data culture questions that I want to recruit some of you. For a little extra background, SubWire is doing this at baseball games, so we're deploying this to baseball games. We were during the pandemic doing this with live performances with musicians.
Do you guys work with the Kraken hockey team?
I have not worked with the Kraken hockey team, but I would love to.
I was just wondering because I was at a game last year.
All right. Hope you had some fun on this Okay, so data culture. You all just contributed to a little digital journal of the talk here today. So does anyone want to offer up pieces or an idea of who's going to own this data? So you all contributed to this collage. Who owns it? Good. All right, so someone volunteered to own it. Okay. So you have one volunteer. Are you guys okay with her owning this and training the model on it? Maybe post it to socials. All right, we'll talk after the. Okay, she's gonna own it. So who should be able to access this data? So if you had shared some fun moments at a game or a concert, who should be able to access this? Anyone? Is this free and open for everybody? Should it be? We're in a private, intimate setting here. There's a little bit of assumption of privacy. Should anybody just be able to access this? Those are some things that we have to think about so far. And if I go and I take this and I start selling it or training models on it or stuff, should I disclose it to you all? Or do I have to do that? I have to make sure that you all know about this. I have no plans to do that at the moment, but as building a data culture inside SubWire, it's something that we need to address head on. And then the other thing is how do we communicate results? Because typically what we might do is we take our inputs, is an example of the wonderful entertainer Hannibal Buress performing in Brooklyn, and we accumulate watch time. So it's how many minutes users are spending interacting with content, creating content. And that's how we display traction to folks like capitalists. But really, there are a whole universe of metrics that we can start to think about. We want to build these engaging, fun experiences that are on the table. So what are the metrics? And then where do we store the data? Do we store it in a centralized way, or do we store it on all the devices decentralized? So technical elements. And then what partners should we consider besides the wonderful university here? We've been speaking with several potential blockchain partners about using tech to manage the ownership and potential payments associated with this amazing content. So this, again, same questions keep coming up: what tools, what workflows, how we create the data. So that's SubWire. I hope that you all take away one or two tidbits as you go interview with practical companies and the next step in your career. Really assess what data culture can look like and what your contribution can be to those organizations. Last thing I'll say is, we do a happy hour at 4 o'clock. I'll be at Thanks for having me.